Now this one's going to run with Jeff kicking us off with his presentation, and then we're likely in this case to get some dialogue after that, which we can share in together. So Jeff Powell is a first generation farmer near Bailenup, as we heard earlier, and the co-founder of WA's only vertically integrated beyond organic pasture-raised chicken and duck operation. Since 2006, Jeff has restored the historic Southampton homestead landscape back to perennial pasture twice. Once in the recovery from monoculture pine plantation, and again in 2013 following a devastating bushfire. Jeff, alongside wife Michelle McManus, raises meat chickens and ducks out on pasture and crucially manage all aspects of the supply chain on farm. From growing and harvesting birds through to marketing, wholesaling and selling directly to the community, retailers and restaurants. And they do all this to increasing award-winning acclaim. We recorded a podcast a few years back. The first one we recorded was a few years back, and it hit me in a moment while we were recording that I'd met both of them years prior in Perth. I'm talking 15 years prior in Perth, and in a moment their faces came flashing across my memory in a totally different context before they were together. But to say they go back, and that was of course when they were in Perth doing other extraordinary things, and they've ended up down here doing extraordinary things. That podcast was titled Growing Food and Farmers for 500 Years. That ethos has led to the recent emergence of a collective of new pastured poultry farms around the southwest. They now bring over 30,000 pasture-raised chickens to the public, regenerating local farming families, landscapes and economies. Please welcome Jeff Powell.
Well, thank you all. It's the dog watch, as we say, so that time of day. But I wanted to both express my humility and say thank you for having me, but also my admiration for all the stories that are sitting here in the room as well, and share one more story, I suppose, to take us out. Sitting there over the last 2 days, of course, making connections between the stories that we've had up here. Yeah, healthy farm, healthy soils, healthy minds, and although I'm not going to focus in so much on those as words, you'll see the themes as they come through, because yeah, we have one of the things that we do say on our farm is that it's all connected. So where's my pointer? Welcome to Southampton Homestead. We're a smaller farm, so I think one of the guys on the last panel was saying as well, small farm, so 50 hectares. The Blackwood Valley, or Gorbilliup, as we say. Just to give you a quick idea of context, I suppose, first, we'll talk through a bit of the general info about the farm and how we sort of set it up in that regeneration. I wanted to share with you a little bit about an experience that we had, and as Anthony has alluded to as well, it was a crucible for purpose, I suppose, and the development of that important mission. And then to talk about our mission, which it's interesting when you think about a mission, to try and keep them as concise as possible, and I think we win the award for that, Grow Food, Grow Farmers. So can't get shorter than that. But yeah, so as far as the context goes, welcome to our valley. We're at the highest point of the Darling Escarpment, so the hilltops surrounding us here are about 400 metres above sea level. As far as the country goes and First Nations, we've got, if you imagine, here's the Blackwood River, Gorbilliup, heading in this direction, which is west. We're heading into Wodandi country. Heading down this direction, Bridgetown beyond Brockman Highway, we're heading into Pilman country. And then kind of down to the bottom left of the screen, which is heading in the northeasterly direction, we're at Kenang. So if you imagine there's a meeting of three of the traditional language groups for the region. Yeah, it's interesting because we don't necessarily have that Indigenous connection in our valley, because yeah, there's obviously a history there, but it's very difficult to find and connect with. But since the property was first settled by First Fleeters in the 1860s, 1850s, you can see here the homestead was established. It was almost like a scene out of Monty Python. If you've seen the One Day Lad, All This Is Be Yours, do you remember the scene? So, of course, they built just down around where these two trees are here, and in 1859 the river came up and flooded the homestead. So they retreated up the hill a bit higher and built the homestead that you can see there. We're 100 foggy mornings a year, which is awesome from a point of view, because of the elevation, of course. Our summers, we might hit the 40-degree mark or above, but by night things cool down, and nearly every night we have precipitation. So there's a fog or there's a dew on the grass, which, as far as if you're talking about feeding perennials over those tougher months, the brittle season, it's a fantastic opportunity. All right. Brilliant. You know this bloke? Just quick bit of background. So I have a sort of mainstream background, inspiration from my childhood, my grandmother, who had as I said in the story I shared with Anthony, she had a quarter-acre block in Bayswater that I used to visit as a kid. That was entirely food. So it was a food forest, permaculture, if you want to call it that. But of course, we didn't call it that back then. It was just about growing food at home. So my childhood activity was working in the garden, so weeding and all those other fantastic nourishing activities, and then eating, grazing. So excitement of heading over to Nana's and heading out to see what was in season. What tree did we have to climb, etc. But in later life, I went into business, and I found myself doing a degree at Curtin University here in town in Perth, and where we were looking at some of the bigger contexts in life. And at the time, I was working in management consulting and strategic HR, and looking at the future, I suppose, the next 50 years. And back then, we were talking about, at the time I was studying, we were talking about, imagine interconnected, decentralised grids. We could have panels on houses, on schools, on etc., which has become this reality now. But we're also looking at the future of the environment. We're looking at climate. We were looking at soil and of course food. And to be honest with you, this is back around 2000. I didn't like what I saw, and it was pretty concerning. And I began to suspect where my destiny lay was actually, I thought one of the most useful things I could learn in the next 40 to 50 years and pass on to my kids was how to grow soil and how to grow food, and to do it in a way that was what I call congruent. So anyway, I live a simpler life now, if you like, but of course it's very complicated too. We'll get into some of the detail later. Hang out with a lot of these guys, which you're looking at there. It's a Ross chicken, which, does anyone know the cross, what the two breeds are, the heritage breeds that make up this chicken? Yes, and? Plymouth. Yeah, so white Plymouth bird. So, a fantastic animal, an animal who we take great joy in raising and sharing our life with, and then of course we enjoy them as well as food. So just a quick introduction. You know this lady? Sorry, honey. I know. I think I'm on my knees begging their extra forgiveness, but. No, that's one of those fabulous summer storms that you do hope for. But a lot of rain come out of that one. But I want tip of the hat, of course, to Michelle, because it's a team effort in order to bring to fruition an idea, and certainly to regenerate an idea in a situation that we're actually facing. And I suppose I wanted to give you a quick context. Given my interest and given that realisation I had earlier, has anyone seen the documentary Food Inc? A few people? Okay. And in there was a book mentioned, of course, Omnivore's Dilemma, which I think we've seen up on the screen at least once today. And when I looked at that book and that story, there was a bloke mentioned in there a couple of times called Joel Salatin. I don't know if anyone's heard of Joel Salatin. Yep. And it was an interesting idea, because in that documentary, in that book, it describes a guy who was growing these birds, and if you like chickens, on the pasture. So they're called pasture raised. And I wish I'd actually bought a chicken, Michelle, so we could actually give it as a prize, because I actually am going to ask you the difference between a free range chicken and a pasture raised chicken, but that's to come a little bit later. But I began asking the question about I was interested in this idea of soil and health, and then human health in particular. And I came across the writings of a guy called James Chestnut. And has anyone heard of James Chestnut? A quick show of hands. One. Wow, there you go. And so doctor, physiologist, chiropractor in the United States, and I think he's living in Canada at the moment. But he introduced me to these ideas back in around about 2009 of what we call innate intelligence. And that is that every single organism on this planet, blessed with DNA and even some of those with RNA, have this innate intelligence where the organism strives and, if you like, has an autopilot setting for this end of this scale. Oops. 10 out of 10, optimum wellness. And the expression of that wellness, how do you get to that optimum wellness? Well, by achieving what we call congruency or genetic congruency. So whatever the genes require in order to express health needs to be obtained from the environment. So, and how do you get there? Well, it's about what that organism ate, how it moved, and in the case, I know bacteria, they probably do think, don't they? There's quorum sensing, so we'll have to say they do think. But yeah, so eat, move, and think. But across those dimensions, and if you just think about it from a point of view of human beings, and one of the things I've said to Anthony and others was that, you imagine human beings are currently, we're in a state of crisis, I suppose, as far as the human health. We've got this epidemic of chronic illness. And the interesting thing, the American Journal of Physiology said that human beings are now expressing what we call adaptive symptoms, as in we're organisms, we are wild humans living in captivity, just like zoo animals. When zoo animals are taken from the wild and put into a zoo, they suffer a range of maladies that actually look like our chronic illnesses. Exactly the same thing across eat, move, and think. So you ask yourself the question: is that animal, is that organism existing in an environment where it can express itself? So is it attaining what it needs to eat? Is it able to move its body in a way that it's congruent, it's actually involved to? And it's thinking, it's emotional, and it's the enriched environment, its mental life. Is it having those needs met as well? Because if it is, it moves towards an expression of wellness. And if it's not, if there's toxicity or deficiency in that environment against those indicators, it begins to move back down towards what we call adaptation, of course, which is an expression of pathology or illness. So being exposed to that model, I just went, holy cow. And then I saw Food Inc., and then I read Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma, and went, our food, oh my God, what is our food able to express its genetic intelligence? Is our food living congruently with its requirements? And brace yourself. So permit me to take you to some of these places, because we've got great parts of the story as well, but this ain't part of that. This is not great. These are pigs, and this is where bacon comes from. So are these pigs living in that environment where they can express wellness? And of course, the answer to that question is probably not. Are they eating foods that are congruent with their requirements? Well, probably not. Are they happy? And the answer is probably not. And so the question for us then, and at the time for me, was, I don't think I want to eat that. I don't want to eat sick food. And so this is actually inside a free-range shed here in Western Australia. And there was I think it was Dave Mason mentioned a little bit about integrity. Is David here? Dave Maslin? No. Yeah, but that integrity is the next thing that's going to need to be confronted. And because when you think free range, is this what is coming to mind? And my answer was no. Are these chickens living in these groups of 500,000 to 1 million birds? Are their needs being met congruently? Is it an environment that enriches them? Is it an environment that their nutritional requirements are being met? Is there forage here? And what about their social life? As far as, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the chicken growers in the room, it's about 99 faces, isn't it? They can remember, as far as 99 other chickens. Anything over that becomes confusing. So yeah, and there's definitely more than 99 chickens in here. So it becomes a very confusing, stressful environment. So once again, a free-range chicken, is it a free-range chicken? And what I came to discover was this is the marketing material of the same company. So without judging it, I will say we've got an integrity problem. And I, at that time, I realised this. I went, this ain't good enough. And I suppose that mission crystallised when I came across Southampton Homestead. So if you guess that, you're right on track. So free range, does it live on pasture? No. Does it move on to clean pasture? No. Does it have access to outdoors? Maybe. Is it seasonally raised? No. Its primary diet is fairly well controlled as far as it's been pre-mixed, it's been made into pellets, it's been made into crumble. Where did that material come from? What was in it? Was it actually a bioavailable food? Does it actually meet those chickens' requirements? Organic? Maybe a surprise for you over on this side. Yeah, so the chickens coming from Queensland at the moment, the organic chickens that you'll find in the supermarkets, don't live on pasture, don't move on to clean pasture. They might have access to the outdoors, but of course when you've got a shed of 100,000 organic chickens, how much vegetation will be growing just outside the black laughs? Yep, yeah. So you can see the challenge that we've got, and for Michelle and I as chicken farmers, that communication piece is so important, and we're going to come to that a little bit later. Southampton Homestead, circa 2011, 2012, I suppose. But when I arrived in 2006, what we actually had was this old property that had been a farm and it had actually fallen into disrepair. Round about the 1960s, 1970s, there was a recession in both dairy and beef, and the state government came in and bought out a lot of family farms in our area, including Southampton, and those properties were then turned into pine plantations, so where Rowan is, but yeah, so the pastures were planted out into pines, and these are the riparian zones, so we're looking sort of towards, the Blackwood River is just on your left, and this is the Norrellup, which is another river which actually passes through Southampton, and it's 10 foot high, canes thicker than your thumb, and you have no idea what's actually in there. We don't know what the landscape is, we don't know what the landforms are. Yeah, so we've got a dominance and an expression going on in these riparian zones. And this is what the pastures look like on the right. So we had 10 foot high pine debris. So the guys had come in and they cleared the pines not more than a couple of months before I arrived. So it was a fixer-upper. But at the time, of course, in addition to my earlier readings and about, maybe I could grow chickens, I became exposed to the work on ABC's Australian Story, Peter Andrews, Back from the Brink, of Droughts and Flooding Rains, I think the Australian Story was called, the most popular episode in the program's history. So, interesting story that, and I got fascinated with this idea of succession, about the flow of nutrients through and the flow of water through landscapes. And it's the first time I started entertaining these ideas of landscape function and soil function. And I wondered if I would just have a go. And at this time, I'm still living in Perth. I'm commuting down to Southampton. And, within the first year, I suppose, those fields completely returned to blackberry, which I just had to get in there with a tractor and slash. So it was all about mechanical mouth. And instead of cows or supporting with livestock, but just smashing down those early opportunists down into mulch and trying to reboot the soil, because that's what the blackberry's trying to do. And of course, within 18 months we had 10 foot high thistles, so they were next. But same thing once again. So what does a thistle do? It sends down a taproot. The taproot is hollow. It cracks open soil that's been asleep for 40 or 50 years. So slash that as well. And by about year 3 to 4, we began looking at this. This is the same area. And I'm actually standing there having a yarn with that bloke, and he said to me, Jeffrey, he said, I think you need to go and do a holistic management course. And at the time it was with the late Bruce Ward, and tip of the hat to him. But yeah, get some livestock, and you need to move down here, and otherwise you're going to start going backwards. So we had the return of these perennial grasses, return of these annual grasses, of clovers, etc., and all this diversity, and I hadn't added a single thing. I hadn't fertilised, I hadn't seeded. So it's fascinating to see what actually was there already. So, does anyone know where this photo was taken? Yep, Malakuta. Yep, 2020. So with the management of our area and with the planting out of the pines, of course, we don't see much burning as far as prescribed burning in those riparian zones, in all those adjoining parcels of land. It becomes very difficult to manage, and there haven't actually been a fire in that area for over 60 years. And of course, when the events of 2020, by the time it was 2020, Australia was almost becoming desensitised to these types of events in a way. It was shocking. I like to think it was a wake-up call, but at the time that happened to us back in 2013, I felt like we were the only ones that it actually had happened to. So I'm going to describe the context of the day. Some shocking photos to follow, but it was 42 degrees. It was catastrophic conditions. The winds built up to 80 kilometres an hour, and we had a thunderstorm and 66 lightning strikes. And no rain. Fueled by blackberry and by the plantations, which were largely absentee managers, had led to this the catastrophic combination of these pyrophytic fuels, and of course the landscapes as well. And a 40-metre high wall of flame came through our valley. And off-gassed all that work that we'd actually done. It's interesting because when I moved to the country, I didn't understand, I suppose, that the spectrum of experience you can have in a city. If you think about the spectrum of light, you've got violet at one end and you've got red at the other. And beyond that, you've got ultraviolet, etc. I felt like the experience I'd had in the city was from red to violet. When I moved to the country, I suddenly realised how much of the spectrum of light actually exists, and the experiences of highs and jubilation, and then the experiences of lows, brought into my psychology that that realisation that there are other experiences in life, and that all of my training, everything I had done in my life prior to that, had prepared me for this experience. And how I viewed it and how I carried on. And I remember a moment imprinted indelibly, and it took 2 days to find the stock and to bury them. And I want a tip of the hat to Heidi and the lessons that I've been learning and what the land has been teaching me about sensitivity. Because in that journey of regeneration and recovery, I've been learning how to listen. And at this point, I knelt down in that field and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And it said to stay. And it wasn't a word, it was just a feeling and an intuition, I think was the word that someone was using, but stay. And that was enough to crystallise what I needed to do, that this place, the innate intelligence that was buried in this valley, the trees, the microbes, the fungi, the water, the rocks, they exist with us, not separate to us, and they needed what I had to bring in order to envision the place to be different to what it was at this point. And it's a journey back that continues for us still. This sort of stuff is harder to fix actually than the environment, which is an interesting lesson. But we began. I had friends who showed up with machinery, with seed, and we had a lot of damage. The canopies and trees of all the surrounding riparian zones, surrounding forests, and any stumps, of course, had all just burned away. The trees were damaged badly. It took probably 8 or 10 weeks to try and get the farm back to a state where we could get from point A to B, remove all the old fences and all that sort of gear. But pretty much everything was gone. So it was about re-establishing all of that infrastructure, the water. I'm camped in a caravan under an oak tree, which is an interesting point I haven't actually mentioned, is that part of what the first fleeters had done was plant these oak trees 160 years ago around the homestead and around our A zone, if you like. Anything that was near the trees or under the trees was fine. But unfortunately, we lost the house to ember attack because everyone had been pulled out and evacuated by that point. So there was no one there really to manage the embers as they came down. But we introduced a variety. Jake, are you here? Jake's gone. Yep. Yeah, but when you talk about that, lessons around seed and about mixing, about perennial seeds and reintroducing a perennial dominant mix to the pasture. The interesting thing for Michelle and I is that 10 years later, we haven't introduced another seed, but our biodiversity has continued to increase and other species have continued to arrive. Fascinating. Were they here already? Are they arriving? Or is it, if you build it, they will come? All great lessons, but we're still practicing regenerative agriculture and practicing the planned grazing using a number of species, but we continue 10 years later without fertiliser and without those other conventional inputs. Now, of course, we have animals for our inputs, and we'll talk that through. I wanted to dive in here now a little bit about our mission: grow food, grow farmers, and if you like, our logo for Michelle and I says it all. It's all intelligent, it's all alive, it's all connected. If you go back to that third slide about the EMOOT thing, so if you understand that it's all intelligent, that the intelligence, so you're nodding, the intelligence is embedded in the field, the intelligence is embedded in the animals, and the intelligence is embedded in human beings. That if we can get those intelligences to line up and to listen to one another, then we can grow food. Another truism we live by, just a motto, but powered by grass, because it's an acknowledgement, a tip of the hat to the soil that powers our system. Because without this, we couldn't begin to build that diversity and complexity and nutrient density into the animals that are actually grazing on here. One of my early teachers said to me, there are no new fundamentals. And when I looked at the date, I suddenly realised what we needed to do, and we needed to look backwards in order to move forwards. And how do you run a pastured poultry system? If you don't know what you're looking at here, you're looking at these little devices. They're called chicken tractors. And you're looking at herbivores grazing as well in a mixed species system. And this is Yorkshire in 1943 from a book called The Farming Ladder, which is a fascinating read. Some parts are dated, but most of it's timeless. There's no new fundamentals. So what does a healthy chicken farm look like? So we have a system where we look to the Saltertons as an inspiration for that. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to build a human-scale farm. So a farm where my kids could actually operate the machinery that we have here, as far as how much effort does it actually take to drag one of these chicken tractors across the field for a move. And for those who aren't familiar with the system, so each one of these shelters we've got 40 birds in, and at the moment in this picture, the tractors are actually heading in this direction, so they're heading away from us across the field. And the management that we actually apply is that all areas that are involved in that feed budget at Southampton in a year spend 1 day on one spot. So every day, that whole row of tractors, the one is, in the background as well, move forward 1 square, like a bunch of checkers, if you like, across the field. Tractors hoovering up grass, the legumes, the soil. But of course, the great thing about the chickens, they can actually browse and express their chickenness, as Joel Salatin says, the chickenness of the chicken. So they get to live in a small group where, you know, they all know each other. There's a pecking order. I mean, that's where it comes from. There's a couple of times I really love spending with my chickens, and among them are actually when we go out into the field, and let's double check. They're very excited to see you, of course, every morning, because they know it's coming. They know they're about to move onto a fresh salad bar. Thank you for demonstrating, Michelle. They're about to move onto a fresh salad bar. You can see that they don't get to, every day they're moved off their manure onto a fresh salad bar, and then of course they get their feed as well. And of course chickens are omnivores, and they're not a peaceful society. So if you're a frog or a mouse or any of those other small fauna, watch out. They are descended from dinosaurs. But what a great environment for the birds to actually express wellness in. And when you talk about biodiversity, and you talk about the soil that we've been building with these grasses now for over 10 or 15 years, that begins to become expressed in the animals because they're foraging on it as well. For a quick show of hands, who's farmer in the room? Wow. Okay. I wondered how many there were. Anyone else a little bit anxious about time off the farm? Yeah, in particular, we've got the Marima Livestock Guardians, of course, so ours have been on their own for 2 days, you know. So what have those rat bags been up to is the question. But yeah, can you see the birds are actually bought as 1-day-old chicks. They come onto the farm, they go into the brooder, 21 days. They have to be supported in order to grow their first plumage. And then we move into the chicken tractors at 21 days, where they spend the rest of their life out here in the pasture till about 10 to 12 weeks old. And that's a meat bird's life. So they're not sexually mature, they don't lay eggs, they don't crow. But they're brothers and sisters, if you like. They're siblings from the industrial system, are normally harvested around 6 weeks of age. That's a quick vertical shot. And in a way, I mean, Joel Salatin founded this system. There's a genius to the grazing, because the performance in the grasses, and we watch it every time the tractors come through. It's about day 14 to day 21. We get these enormous pulses of growth come up and through. But of course, among the challenges we have is recovery periods, because we've also got the herbivores. We have herbivores for biology, and we have chickens for economy. I think one of our friends in South Australia said he raises chickens to support his beef habit, which is it's a great cliche. There's one of them. The feed, we're still working on this system. We've had arrangements with local growers as well. So because we're just on the edge of if you like, between the Capes and the wheat belt, it's a good region for actually growing some of these things. So field peas, lupins, barley, wheat, etc. But trying to source those as locally as we can. And as far as preparation, we keep the smaller grains whole. We crack the legumes for the birds. And then we ferment them. So we have a biological preparation, tip it on, add water, leave it for 24 hours. So the birds actually have a wet feed, which seems to introduce a whole range of effects that we don't clearly understand, but I'm not going to say no to them, because it seems to build a better animal. So there's a bunch of congruency in what we're doing, as opposed to, if you like, pellets. And the result? So has anyone seen any chicken like that in supermarkets lately? Only in France. Interesting. Yeah, go figure. So I had a friend walking the Camino Trail, and he was taking photos of these huge herds of ducks out in the fields. Amazing. But yeah, that colour, right? That yellow fat. This is the effects of actually having chickens live congruently on pasture. And we haven't done any of that testing, that nutrient density. 5 minutes, holy cow. Way over time. Yeah. Sun's out, guns out. There's Anthony James, Terry and Pam. And what we're standing in is that same paddock I showed you before with the pine debris. Okay, and so this is November. Was it last year? November last year, I think. Yeah. That biodiversity, that we've literally got a grassland here. We've got the underbrush, and then we've got the canopy, if you like, but it only stands sort of 4 foot tall. But we've got the cows coming through then and knocking this down. But it's all part of that cycle. Great dung beetles, amazing. Tip of the hat to some of our mentors and heroes. Darren Doherty from Agrarians, if you haven't looked him up. Amazing community of practice, 6,000 regenerative farmers in one place on the Agrarians platform in Workplace. So you can Google that. Muscovy ducks, anyone raised those before? They're awesome until you try and pick them up. Tip of the hat to Joel. He and his son Daniel and wife Sherry came to our farm a couple of times, and they've actually visited the region. Have been over for a while, but an ongoing source of mentorship and support. And coming to what Darren Doherty called the terms of trade. So the reintroduction of the terms of trade to the farm is one of the things that we've really focused on, because we couldn't really access the market if we grew chickens, where we were going to get them harvested. And some of the little facts I've dropped I think yesterday and during the talk, 54 abattoirs here in the southwest in 1992. By 2004, they're all gone. So 2014, Michelle McManus, thank you. 2014, we re-established a micro abattoir on the farm, a fully approved facility, and have continued to build that. And it's interesting because when you are clear with your purpose, you attract amazing people as well. So we've got an awesome team of folks who turn up to our place 1 to 2 days a week, and we harvest chickens on our facility. And then another tip of the hat, is there any Dirty Clean Food, Wide Open Agriculture people here? Yeah, so how do we get them to market, right? Michelle and I, we tried that for a number of years of doing it ourselves. And I said, I'll do this if it kills me. I nearly died. So the experience of actually trying to get our chicken to the customers, that prayer was answered when Wide Open Agriculture said, we're going to partner with you, and that arrangement's been in place for a number of years. We've now reached capacity there, and so now we're looking to actually grow that distributorship. So my tip of the hat to Dave Maslin is, I thought he was going to talk about merinos and wool. He was actually answering some of the questions that we've got about how to distribute out into the market. But a thank you to our team. Here we are at our spring harvest dinner. And of course we value add as well, as does Dirty Clean Food with the chickens. My daughter, upcoming botanist, and Archie boy. And grow food, grow farmers. The thing that we've attracted into the market and provide an opportunity now for other farms. And that's where, as Anthony mentioned, we're up to 30,000 birds a year now actually coming through our farm. And we've reached that nexus where we're now talking about growing more food hubs like ours. There are actually more abattoirs around Australia and locally. Building business plans, sitting down with folks. It's all of that leadership issues now, which, I never thought I'd find myself here again. And thank you to the guys, and tip of the hat. We've got Rose's Ridge, Sam, if you guys know Sam and Steph Hondemer, and buoying up Ewan and Caitlin. We don't see this, Will. But holistic management, this is what it looks like. This is what, planned grazing and stewardship, the relationship between biology and human beings, and the partnering with the intelligence in those animals, and they know what to do. You've just got to provide the opportunity and let life flow into it. Any questions?
Wouldn't it be good to talk about that? But thanks so much, Jeff. Hell of a story. I've just got so many echoes coming through the line from the last couple of days through your story. Was it Gabe who said his devastating crunch points he looks back and he's thankful for? But clearly the scars are in use still. You see the scars on the land, hey. While it looks amazing in so many ways, the scars don't go that quick, which just emphasises the preventative medicine across the board and investing in that to not have to try and pick up pieces everywhere all the time. So here's to that.